One of the fact checkers, the lead fact checker, the senior fact checker for the Washington Post, imagine how much integrity and reliability you have to have, not just to be a fact checker at the Washington Post, which is already an incredible amount of integrity, but the senior fact checker, the chief fact checker for the Washington Post, Glenn Kessler, on Saturday purported to analyze the truth and falsity of the claim being made by Donald Trump and other Republicans that the candidacy of Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in Manhattan who has overseen the prosecution of Donald Trump, is funded by George Soros. Here's why Republicans claim that Soros funded Bragg. Quote, Bragg was endorsed on May 8th of that year by the political arm of Color of Change, a progressive criminal justice group. In a statement that highlighted Bragg as the only black candidate in the race, Color of Change said it planned to spend, quote, over $1 million on an independent expenditure campaign for Bragg, such as sending, quote, 8 robust waves of direct mail through Manhattan in May, and then more direct mail in June highlighting early voting. On March 14th, 6 days later, Soros sent $1 million to Color of Change, federal election record show. In any case, Color of Change never met the $1 million goal, notwithstanding its news release. State election records show that it spent less than half of that amount, $420,000, on independent expenditures for Bragg. That amounted to about 9% of the group's total spending in the election cycle, according to FEC records. A Bragg advisor said that the candidate raised $2.4 million before the primary. So the primary is everything in New York politics. So he raised $2.4 million. $400,000 or $500,000 was spent by the Color of Change, which is essentially 20% of the overall Bragg spending. Of course, that came from George Soros. He then says, in the primary, Bragg defeated Tali Faridi and Weinstein, who had funded her campaign with $8.2 million of her own money, by 34.3% to 30.7%, a difference of just 9,000 votes. So he won the Democratic Party primary by only 9,000 votes over this extremely rich Jewish opponent, as the Washington Post said, who spent millions and millions of dollars of her own money. Now, he won by 9,000 votes. Of course, it's completely rational to suggest, we'll never know for sure, but it's certainly viable, that the reason he won is because Color of Change had $1 million of George Soros money, that it used half of that to flood Manhattan with direct mail advertisements urging votes for Alvin Bragg. Of course, Alvin Bragg was funded by George Soros. He is a Soros-funded candidate. Here's where we come with the Pinocchios. Quote, the Pinocchio test Republicans are being slippery here. This is the Pinocchio test. Republicans are being slippery here. Claiming Soros funded Bragg is simply false, but many rely on the more ambiguous phrase of backed, which is technically correct. What is that? So the Republicans are saying that he was backed by George Soros. And what does the Washington Post fact checker call that claim? Technically correct by several degrees of separation. And here's how he finishes. But it's still misleading and therefore worthy of 3 Pinocchios. He gave it 3 Pinocchios. There they are. This adolescent, infantile, moronic way that the Washington Post calls people liars. The whole article did nothing but prove that the statements are correct. They lied about what the statements were in order to claim that they were lying, and then said, really, most of all, anyone who even talks about this hates Jews. Whatever this is, it is not apolitical. And it is most definitely not different than the kind of journalism you've all correctly concluded was worthy of nothing but your contempt and distrust. It's just the same thing with a different title. Now, let's look at what happened to Glenn Kessler as a result of all of this, as a result of the community notes on Twitter that is intended to fact check claims that people post on Twitter. It's an innovation of Elon Musk, I believe. It may have existed before he bought it, I don't think so, but in any event, it's become very prominent. So here you see the first tweet by Glenn Kessler promoting his own fact check article. He says, new fact check. The incendiary claim that George Soros funds Alvin Bragg, and he linked to his article. And it was immediately appended with a community notes note that said, quote, Soros donated $1 million to the Color of Change, the largest individual donation it received in the 2022 election cycle, days after it endorsed Bragg for district attorney and pledged more than $1 million in spending to support his candidacy, and it links to a CNBC article saying that. So the fact checker for the Washington Post had his claim fact checked by the public, by all of you. It's not easy to get a community notes claim or context or fact check added onto a tweet. A lot of people have to agree with it, and it has to be backed up by facts. There's a community notes team that determines whether or not it's a valid note, and they determined that it was. So he got his own tweet, the fact checker did, fact checked by the public. Once he saw that his fact check was fact checked, he went back to Twitter to complain in the most petulant, bitchy, condescending, obnoxious way imaginable, and this is what he wrote. Quote, Twitter trolls, meaning the people who fact-checked him, Twitter trolls who posted a, quote, community note to this tweet apparently have not read the actual fact check. Click the link and you will find that Color of Change did not spend $1 million in independent expenditures on Bragg, as people often claim. So he's trying to say that these losers, all of you who fact-checked him, Twitter trolls, not him, he's a senior fact-checker for the Washington Post, he's very, very important. Anyone who disagrees with him or who dissents from what he's saying are losers. They're worthless losers. They're the dirty masses, Twitter trolls. He said the Twitter trolls got it wrong because Color of Change did not spend $1 million in independent expenditures on Bragg. The community notes went back and fact-checked this tweet as well. So he got fact-checked a second time. And it said, quote, the original community note says that the Color of Change PAC pledged $1 million. Soros donated $1 million to the PAC days after it endorsed Bragg and pledged more than $1 million in spending to support his candidacy. The PAC ultimately spent $420,000. So he also lied about the fact check. The fact check didn't claim that Color of Change spent $1 million. It only claimed that they pledged it, which is absolutely true. So you look at this tweet, and it now has two different fact checks on it. Because the fact checker for the Washington Post is a fraud. Because the entire concept of fact checker is a fraud. They're just the same partisan hacks and activists that you already came to hate who got this new title. Just like disinformation expert, it is a fake title that means nothing. And the fact that he essentially got humiliated twice by Twitter and then came back and showed his scorn for the public shows you how they think about the public. Do you see now why they're so eager to censor the internet? Why they're so desperate to maintain control over who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak on the internet? Because they know that if free speech is allowed on the internet, their lies will be exposed. They know that the only way to shield their propaganda from correction and dissent, as just happened to him, is to silence people who disagree, to call the people who disagree with them agents of disinformation. And one of the things they hate most about Elon Musk is that, although far from perfect, at least so far, he pledged to bring more free speech from to the platform. And one thing he has done is he's evened the playing field so that the kind of people who now want to contest the lies that come from the Washington Post fact checker are no longer booted from the platform, are no longer silenced, are no longer algorithmically hidden, but instead are heard. This is why they hate independent media. This is why they run articles demeaning platforms like Rumble the minute it starts to get big enough to challenge them. And it's why they want to censor the internet, because if they don't, their lies get exposed. The only way their propaganda works is if they maintain control over who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak on the internet. And this episode documented that like almost nothing else has. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.